Welcome back, everybody, to the F-Bomb Series podcast. I'm Christina DeRoche. I'm one of your special hosts here. Tara's actually not with us at this moment, but she will be returning soon enough. I have some special guests in our show today, and we'll be discussing types of leadership and why they're important, particularly to women who are pursuing leadership or in leadership roles. So with me today, I have Gisele Hebert. And Gisele used to be the executive director at the Children's Aid Society here in North Bay. And previous to that, you were with the organization in other capacities, right? Other roles.
Yes.
And now she works as a consultant at an HR firm.
Yes.
Yeah. And she's been with that firm, I think, for the last year, right? It's been a year already.
Yes, it has.
Holy cow. So she's with us today. And then we also have our special guest, Chantal, who's been with the hospital for quite some time, too. I remember you when I was there.
Yes,
right?
30
and
years.
you were in a managerial position. And now you're the director of quality and risk, something near and dear to my heart. Mm-hmm. So we're here to talk to you guys today about, leadership and leadership types and how that really forms in your path to becoming a leader. And I think both of you can speak really well to this because I've seen you in a very dominant leadership role, and I loved it. And then I've seen Chantal in a variety of roles, which has been awesome. So I thought you guys would be natural for this. So I have, some questions to ask you. I thought we could get the discussion going. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about how your leadership style has kind of evolved or changed in your positions?
I think for me, I've had the opportunity to, as you mentioned, worked at the hospital for 30 years. And so I feel my biggest lessons have been through teaching, from learning from our successes, but also our failures. And I think they've been the biggest mentor for me in learning from doing and seeing what works with our teams and what I would improve next time.
That's interesting. I want to talk a little bit about the failures in a minute. What about you, Gisele?
Well, I think, when I think of, so I was at the agency for 39 and a half years when I retired, and it's sort of, I always say born and raised at Nipissing Parry Sound Children's Aid. But I think as I evolved in my leadership roles, my leadership styles evolved as well. Mm-hmm. So, I think, when I think of my leadership style, I don't think there's one sort of cookie cutter approach to that.
Right.
I feel, there's different terms for it. I would say participatory, I guess leadership is my, sort of my grounding, which sometimes it's appropriate, sometimes it's not. But then, I always try to be visionary, inspirational, courageous, I think is really important as well. But I think as a leader, you just evolve with age and with experience. And as Chantal said, I think a lot of through successes and some very significant challenges, do you grow in your kind of professional leadership?
Like your style, right, sure. Overall. So let's talk about the failure aspect to it, because oftentimes, I'm research, right? So I'm a research background, and oftentimes research fails. And for us, that is not a failure. That's just something we need to learn and grow upon. Is that how you've reflected in your leadership journeys about failures? Is there something there to learn that we need to move forward with or use in a different capacity?
Yeah, well, for me, I think yes, each fail is really an opportunity and a gift to be able to sort of dissect that, to see, because in leadership, you don't always make the right decisions.
Right.
Right? You might ask others for sort of their input, but you don't always necessarily, you're making the best decisions based on the information that you have, but sometimes it doesn't sort of, for a multitude of reasons, doesn't work out the way you wish it would. But that really is an opportunity to pause and to look at, from an objective point of view, what went well, what went wrong, and how you can sort of, pivot from that and do something different or learn from that for next time.
Do you think that that's natural to all leaders, though, to pause and reflect? Or is that something that was just your style?
Well, I don't think it's just my style, but I think, Chantal and I have had this discussion, and, I think the most, and I was having it actually with Scott a few minutes ago, that I think the most important skill in leadership right now is emotional intelligence. I think you have to have, You have to be very aware of who you are and who you're not. Everything in life is based on relationships, but you sort of really have to really understand and know yourself. Because you'll see leaders that you hear that sometimes. Oh, he or she is a really nice person outside of work, and I'm like, what are you talking about? Because and we were talking about that as well. Like when I go to work, I'm not a different person than I am. And it's being vulnerable, and it's being sort of able to say, I don't know everything. I would love to unpack the imposter podcast that you did, because I would challenge you on that. In the sense that I think that if you come in as a leader and you're authentic, you don't know it all. And for people to be able to know that you don't know it all, gives them permission to have space to know something. Right.
And to also have the space to not know it all either.
Yes.
Right.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Okay. So emotional intelligence, which is funny because Chantal, that was the first thing I learned from you at the hospital. I remember my orientation, and you were the one teaching us about emotional intelligence. So from your perspective, is it the same? That's probably one of the most imperative things to have?
I'm so glad that you remember that. It is an important topic. And I think, having emotional intelligence allows us to be flexible. You talked about your approach changing, our leadership approach changing. I feel very much that way. And I really think it's based on reading the room and knowing if your approach is working for you, how it's being received, if your teams are receiving the message you're giving them in a way that you intended to, and I think it's really understanding, with emotional intelligence, the day, but also the people that you're talking to in the context, and being flexible with that, and then knowing to change your approach and not being stuck in one particular approach, especially if it's not giving you the results that you want. And
and I was going to say, when you think about emotional intelligence, I think it's really being grounded in it's not even grounded. I think it's anchored in your values. So when you're anchored in your values, it becomes easy.
Right.
Because one, people sense it, and two, it's just who you are.
Right.
So I think, and out of that, and some people, like I always say, people can only rise to where they've, what's the saying? People can only meet you to the level they've met themselves.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Right. So that's the reality too, is that, you can have very high emotional intelligence, very strong values, but everybody that you're dealing with doesn't necessarily have the same privilege.
Right.
I'm going to say, right?
Yeah.
So in your leadership too, you have to be sort of cognizant in that, both with your staff and with your colleagues.
Yeah.
And with other individuals that you're working with in the community, right?
Yeah. So why don't you tell us a little bit about, in that journey to leadership, or in your journey with leadership, I want to say, what are some of the things that you've learned along the way that you can probably provide others as a piece of advice back, or as a story that can illustrate your approach?
Well, I mean, Chantal and I had sort of the discussion. I said to her, what was the most challenging experience in your leadership? Because as we talked about just previously, I think that's where you grow. For me, that was the labor disruption. So we had a labor disruption, as you know. And, I think when I think back to that time, it was the most challenging time of my career for sure. And I was being faced with, advice that was saying that I should do this, I should do that. But it wasn't true to my values. So, when you say, Chantal always says what we tell your 25-year-old self, is bring yourself, your whole self, authentic self to the table. That's what I would say to people. And you know what? If there's issues you have, we all have issues, but I always say this to my kids, own your shit. You know what I mean? Own your shit. Like if you did something wrong, then you own it.
You own up to it.
And from that, you grow, your staff grows. So I don't know if that answers your question.
It does.
Not, but yeah.
Yeah, it does. I hear a lot of authenticity as a word. What if you're approaching leadership and you don't know what your authentic self looks like?
you will impact your organization. I've seen it. I've seen so much of it. I think leaders lead with confidence, or they lead. I was having a discussion about this with someone about a year ago, I guess. People lead with confidence or with insecurity. And when people lead with insecurity, authenticity doesn't sort of have space there. And that shows up as, condescending, micromanagement, controlling, power. It comes down to power and control. So I think that when you're truly authentic, I remember my staff used to say, "Oh my God, I'm in your office. I can't believe." And I'd say, "What do you mean?"
Yeah.
What do you mean? Like, I'm like you. But if you're in leadership for power, you're in it for the wrong reasons.
That's interesting.
Right?
I would agree. And I think the only way to sustain any form of leadership is being true to yourself. I mean, you can be autocratic one moment because you think that's what the situation needs, but experience tells you that you can't sustain it if it's not true to yourself. And for me, being authentic means, as you said, being the same person that you are outside of here that you would be in your office or in the boardroom. And for me, it's always being kind. And that's what is most natural to me, and it doesn't require an effort. Anything else that requires an effort can't be sustained. And you find yourself being inconsistent with your approach if you're not true to yourself.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think transparency is very important as well. I think of, leaders, that keep sort of all the information to themselves, and that, again, that's power and control. But I think there's a lot of situations where, and I fully understand you can't be fully transparent with your employees or with your staff, but, oftentimes I think you can be much more transparent than maybe some leaders are. And I think that's also really important because I think that's where you build trust. You build trust, and then you can also provide rationale for some of the decisions that you're making. Yeah. So they can sort of understand, I'm thinking of union negotiations or, so they can understand what your position and your rationale for making that decision is, and vice versa,
Yeah. So I'm thinking, Chantal, what would have been one challenging experience for you? Because we've heard from Gisele, but I'm wondering for you, what would have been the most challenging for you that you've kind of learned from, perhaps?
Yeah. So I think for me, it was leading during the pandemic. And my core values told me that patients and families should not be separated. And despite knowing what was true to me and having to enforce that necessary separation at the time, we knew that it was harmful. And even to this day, we feel those harmful effects. And being the director of quality at the moment, it allows me to really have learned from those hard lessons and really bring back patient and family involvement at the top of our priorities and make sure that we are making decisions with them, nothing about them without them. And I think that was hard for many of us in healthcare and my colleagues, and that we've lived through, and we never want to live through again. And I think in terms of the advice that I would give my younger self would be to that leadership is like a muscle. You're born with it, but I think unless you work out or you're exercising it or practicing, you're not going to see the growth. And I think there's so many opportunities for us to practice leadership, and you don't need to be an executive director or a director to be practicing your skills as a leader. I think frontline staff have many opportunities to practice leadership. They can have a lot of impact on, for me, the patients they serve, and for you, the children that they serve, and also their colleagues. And I think it's practicing those small moments where they can actually have an impact and get better at it and get more comfortable with being uncomfortable. And so there's no shortages of opportunities. And I even think in your own household, there's opportunities. We know there's a plethora of things you can lead in your own household.
Yeah. Yeah.
Tell my kids that.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. You tell my kids that?
Yes.
Maybe my husband too.
That's right.
Well, so that's interesting that you say that, because I often think about the times when the system doesn't allow for leadership For example, you're working in an organization or an institution that doesn't allow you to lead, for example, and you have a leader at the top who's very much doing it for power and control, right? The wrong reasons for leadership. How do you in that instance kind of move past that? How do you reflect on that as trying to lead something, but you're micromanaged, so to speak? What do you guys think about that?
It's a really good question because it becomes extremely challenging, right?
Right.
And I mean, you can only affect change to a certain level. I think you still can affect change for sure within your sort of world, but I think it's limited for sure.
I think that's where, though, like, and what you're saying, Gisele, is where you remain your authentic, your most authentic self, right? So if you can just remain in that authenticity, I'm going to jumble my words because that word is driving me nuts today, but like, if you can remain in that authenticity as a leader, even with your colleagues around you, is that a way to at least practice the leadership skill? Yeah,
and I think, I think you were speaking about that or a bit earlier, but I think the temperature gauge really is the minute that you're not aligned with your core values, that's where it falls apart, right? Because then that's when you're starting to feel like I can't continue to do this work. Like sometimes there's decisions to be made as well, right?
Yeah.
Because, I think, and some people maybe aren't guided by their values. I don't know. But I think if you're someone who has that you're very self-aware, that you're, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and that you are grounded and anchored in your values, I think it becomes very difficult to work in a workplace where those values aren't sort of mirrored.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Would you think the same thing?
Yeah, and I think as a future leader, if you're in those circumstances, you have to ask yourself, is this a place where I can grow?
Yeah.
And is this really a place where I see myself making the most of an impact in this career that I have? Yeah. We can all, there's so many leadership opportunities, but if you're not given those opportunities and the culture is not of growth, then you need to reevaluate, where you want to work and if this is a place where you think you can grow.
Yeah. I often think too, how there's textbook definitions of different types of leaderships, right? And styles, et cetera. I often reflect back on to some of the experiences I've had and when I've used certain types over other types, right? Can you kind of comment on when that might have been true for you in your own careers?
Well, I think of, as a baseline, I would say I think it's sort of participatory or collaborative or whatever you want to call that. But I also sort of, and again, core, I would say, or foundationally, I would say inspirational coaching and mentoring.
Yeah.
I like to do that sort of a lot, coaching and mentoring. But there's also been, situations outside of that, which you just have to be authoritative.
Yeah.
You just have to be.
Yeah.
I think that sometimes when you're looking at within an organization, sometimes employees understand that, but I always say they don't know what they don't know.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
You don't know until, how many people get to leadership roles and say, oh my God, I had no idea,
Yeah.
Of this and this. But, so, I think that you use them sort of, the leadership styles, your common ones,
Yeah.
you use them all the time, I think. And some of them you feel more comfortable with, and some of them it's part of leadership, but you don't as feel comfortable. Yeah,
almost like a toolbox, right?
Yeah.
Like you choose the tool for the time that you need that tool, right?
Exactly.
Yeah,
I would agree, and I think there's been times for me where there's actually patient safety issues where it's critical that you become assertive and you become decisive and very clear about what needs to happen in a short time.
Yeah.
And that leadership style is reserved for those situations. Thank goodness they don't happen every day, but and in other opportunities where you're actually creating, innovating, and then you turn to collaboration. Yeah. You turn to creating safe spaces for people to challenge each other, to put their ideas together. And I think there's a place and a time for all of them. And I do think you do need the toolbox and to know when to use those different approaches.
I remember actually because, although I'd say participatory or whatever is my favorite one, it's sometimes you, as a leader, I've done that and thought, what was I thinking? Because because it delays.
Yeah.
Sometimes you have to
What do
get
you
things
think?
done.
Yeah.
Well,
Do
and
you
you think it's
think?
going to be
Yeah.
extremely simple because everybody's going to agree.
But
And then it just delays things
Yeah.
sometimes. But that's how you learn, right?
So what I'm hearing though is that it's the reflection aspect too in your leadership journey that has been probably you do it every day as a leader. You reflect. But yeah, you do reflect on some of those other times where you're like, yeah, what was I thinking?
And what do I
why
do with
didn't
that information now?
Yeah, exactly.
I have 15 opinions and no decision. And so next time you say to yourself, maybe I'll go in with 3 choices.
Yeah.
And maybe we'll start
and give
there.
parameters,
Yes.
right?
Well, and sometimes when you want to be sort of transparent and collaborative,
Yeah.
when you end up with one decision, they say
Yeah.
they just went through the motions.
Yeah.
They knew what they were going to do anyway. It was, which is, so sometimes you can't win, but you just try to do your...
Well, you're doing your best.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. But I think leaders overall are, I'm an overthinker, to ad nauseum. You are
I
too.
take things away, and I
Yeah.
think what could I have done better? Back to that the failures business. The concept of failing forward is true for me, and that it's okay, what could I have done better? What am I learning from this situation, and what am I going to do differently next time?
And also being open, it reminds me when you say that is being open to your staff.
But you said that in transparency, right?
Yeah,
It's
but also getting sort of evaluated from them.
Oh, I see what you're saying.
That's a bit of a check-in, right?
Yeah,
And,
I like
and a
the
lot of
check-ins.
leaders are like, no, I'm not doing that. What if? Well, you should want to hear because you may be projecting A, B, and C, but they might come back to you and say, well, you don't communicate enough, which in communication you never get right. But, but I think it's also important to be able to listen to that and learn from that too, because I think there's always a nugget of something you could learn.
100%.
Yeah.
So as we kind of wrap up on this episode, and I know it's short and sweet, I could spend hours chatting with you too.
so could we.
Honestly.
Yeah.
Is there one thing you'd like to say to our viewers, our audience, to women who are continuing to kind of work in their journey towards leadership?
My words of wisdom would be keep at it, keep growing. When some of my staff ask me, what could I, if you're not on a board, I encourage people to be on a board because you get a whole different side of things, especially as a leader. That's sort of what you're going to be dealing with oftentimes.
Yeah.
And I would say be self-aware. And if there's issues that you feel that you could benefit from help with, I encourage you to do that. And then to be true to yourself and, again, anchored in your values.
Yeah.
And don't get discouraged.
I think I would say that leadership is where you're at, and find the opportunities in everything that you do, big or small things, as I was saying earlier. And, the saying, be the change you wish to see in the world. There are so many things that we can improve on every day, and it starts with you and your desire to want to do more and have the biggest impact in the career that you've chosen.
Thanks for being with us today.
Well, thank you.
I'm
for
really
having
happy
us.
you came on.
Yes,
I
so are
can't
we.
wait to
So are
continue
we.
chatting. Maybe we'll have you again.
Yeah, for
That's
sure.
wonderful. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
No problem.
Yeah.
Thanks, folks, and we'll see you again on the next episode.